Hello, my name is Tsering Pasang. Welcome to Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities. Today we are going to have a conversation with grassroots human rights activist Mr. David Ball from the Uyghur Solidarity Campaign UK. So I'm going to bring David now. Welcome, David.
Hello, Tsering. Thank you for having me.
You can hear me okay?
I can hear you. I can hear you just fine. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Today we're going to have a conversation about your activism. So I'm going to do a brief introduction about you first. For our audience and supporters, David Ball is an organizer of the Uyghur Solidarity Campaign UK, who convenes the monthly Uyghur Solidarity protest outside the Chinese embassy in London. David is a member of the Labour Party. He wrote the emergency motion in support of Uyghur human rights and freedom, which was carried overwhelmingly at the Labour Party Conference 2019. He also organized the campaign for support for the Uyghur people's rights to be included in the Labour Party's 2019 general election manifesto, resulting in the first ever mention of the Uyghurs in China in any major party election manifesto in the UK. As a trade unionist, David is active in Unison and the National Education Union. He has been working to win support for human rights, freedom and democracy for Uyghurs, Tibet, Hong Kong, as well as for workers' struggles across China. David works in a primary school in London, where he first became aware of the Uyghur people's plight and struggle through an Uyghur family at the school. So David, please tell us how you got involved with the Uyghur cause.
Okay, thank you, Tsering. Well, one of the reasons is one you've already mentioned, which I became aware of the situation of the Uyghur people through meeting a family at the school I work at. I also, I think shortly after that, I started to see news reports about 1 million people at the time reported 1 million people locked up in I think what were being called internment camps at the time. That we often now refer to them as concentration camps, and really just at that stage I hadn't taken a decision to be very active on the issue, but obviously I think I'd mentioned, as people often do with these issues, I think I'd mentioned it on social media, just to sort of, put the issue out there and say, look what's going on, and a little bit of a conversation followed from that. What really got me more active on the issue was when it was raised at my constituency Labour Party meeting. So I'm a member of the Labour Party in Finchley and Golders Green, and another member of the CLP, Andrew, brought a motion to the meeting about this issue, saying, we should do some campaigning about this. That's when I thought, yes, absolutely, this is really serious and we need to take this up. And I got in touch with him, said, okay, I really want to do something about this as well. Let's organise this. And from there, got in touch with Uyghur community activists and campaigners in London. And that was sort of January, February 2019. The 5th of February is always an important commemorative anniversary for the Uyghur people. It commemorates a massacre of a demonstration which took place in a city called Gulja. So it's known as the Gulja massacre. And so I got in touch with Uyghur campaigners who invited me to speak at the demonstration, and which I did, and really was the first experience I had really of taking part in that sort of campaigning, and from there really decided that I wanted to do more to organise, particularly in the labour movement, so the labour and trade union movement in this country, to try and mobilise support for the Uyghur people. And from there was the idea of the monthly protests and the other campaigning actions that we've organised.
And how did you set up the Uyghur Solidarity Campaign, UK?
Well, it started really just so it started as a Facebook page to promote the monthly demonstrations, monthly protests outside the Chinese embassy. I decided, well, having talked to some other people, including Uyghur activists, decided to have these protests on the 5th day of every month. There were already two very important protests for the Uyghur people: the 5th of February, one that I mentioned before, another one on the 5th of July. So it sort of seemed to make sense. It would be a date everyone would remember. It's always the 5th day of the month. And so Uyghur Solidarity Campaign became really just initially an idea for, this is how we will promote these protests. We will do it in the name of this campaign. We will seek to mobilise and organise people around that, and then see what else we can achieve, really, see where we can go from there.
Oh, great. It's amazing that through your grassroots level activism, David, you persuaded the Labour Party to adopt an emergency motion to support the Uyghur human rights and freedom, which was overwhelmingly supported or adopted at the Labour Party conference in 2019. Certainly, this is a big achievement. So please share with us how you did this and the significance of securing this emergency motion for the Uyghur people, who are, as we know, facing persecution, in fact, genocides being committed by the Chinese state. David.
Yeah, so the Labour Party in its rules has provision for, as well as the various policy motions that are submitted to conference by constituency Labour parties or CLPs, by trade unions and other affiliated organisations. That's what happens, if you like, in the normal timetable. We realised that, I say we, people in my CLP realised that we'd not taken up that issue within the normal timetable, and actually, in a way, it's more difficult to get motions on the agenda through that normal process. The secretary of my CLP suggested to me, well, how about trying to submit an emergency motion? Which is not something I had done before, but I sort of looked up the rules for what you had to do. Probably luckily for me at the time, the rules were less clear on issues like how many words it's allowed to have and so on, because I was completely unaware of any word limit. But it seemed at the time that there wasn't a very clear rule on that, so I wrote down as many words as I felt I needed to put in the motion. The only thing that's required is, in order for it to qualify as an emergency issue, it needs to be responding to events that have happened literally just in the last few days, in the run-up to the conference. In other words, things that you couldn't have responded to within the normal timetable for making submissions to conference. And so it was a matter of finding issues that would comply with that. As it happened, there were some important issues that it was important to respond to. So Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch had both released important press releases in the days running up to that date, about, for example, about Uyghur children being separated from their families, about the case of a particular geography professor, Tashpolat Tiyip, who had been extrajudicially arrested, disappeared essentially by the Chinese government. And this happened, as you know, this has happened to many people, but it was receiving some attention, some media attention, and so on. So we were able to find issues that we thought it was important to respond to, and to then say, look, this is part of a bigger picture. This is not just a couple of isolated cases. This is part of a bigger picture of something that's happening to the Uyghur people. And on that basis, we were able to get an emergency motion on the agenda. It was deemed to be within the rules. It was accepted. It made it onto the agenda of that Labour Party conference in 2019. The only thing I would say about that, so the way that conference debates are organised is that you tend to get a number of motions sort of heard within the same session, within the same debating session, and people will respond or speak about and respond to the issues that they want to talk about. It so happened that this emergency motion was debated in a session which also included a debate about Brexit and Labour's response to it, a debate about Israel and Palestine, a debate about Yemen. And so there were a lot of other issues that at the time had a much higher media profile, people knew a lot more about, and had a lot more to say about. As a consequence, the debate itself, we didn't get the discussion that we would have liked to have had of the issue of the Uyghurs in that debate. Nevertheless, we did get an overwhelming vote in favour, and I think that was important. What was, leaving aside the number of people we might have reached, and you know, it could have been a significant number that we might have reached people who were watching televised televised coverage of the conference. Even just people within the conference hall, delegates to the conference, many of them very active in their local parties, some of them councillors, some of them MPs, some of them trade union officials. We were reaching them. You know, we were putting an issue in front of them that they may not have really come across before, or they may have heard a little bit about and not seen the importance and the gravity of it. So I think that was an important step. It was sort of within our movement, within, you know, what I regard as my movement, the Labour and Trade Union movement. We were sort of starting to break through and reach a wider audience with this issue, with an issue that. So the Labour and Trade Union movement has traditionally taken up a lot of international issues of solidarity with oppressed peoples around the world, but less so when it comes, well, not so much for the Uyghur people, because I think people genuinely hadn't. I mean, I think even the chair of the debate had trouble with, you know, pronouncing the Uyghur people's name, but also because there is, in parts of the Labour and Trade Union movement, there's a reluctance to take the side of an oppressed people that's oppressed by the Chinese government, which is still seen as, in some respects, on the left. It carries the name of communist. There are organisations in and around the Labour movement which go under the name communist and see themselves as loyal to that government as well. So we needed to challenge that, and that was important. I would say one more thing, actually, and it's not that I want to personalise the issue. I mean, at the time, Emily Thornberry was the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and in many respects, I wouldn't necessarily say, you know, I wouldn't say that she was someone I particularly want to criticise compared with other people in that role. And she raised a lot of important issues. However, and actually a lot of what she said in her speech in that conference was absolutely right, and she made some her denunciation of Donald Trump, for example, and of many other what you could call leaders of the far right around the world. I think she called them sort of strongmen politicians and government leaders, dictators. The sort of glaring omission in the long list that she gave was that she said nothing about Xi Jinping in China, and I felt that was a very problematic omission, but in a sense, it was an indication of what we were facing at the time, why it was important to put that emergency motion in. This wasn't an issue that the Labour leadership at the time saw as something they needed to say very much about. So I felt that that it was more vindicated in the fact that we put it in, because we needed to move things to a slightly different political place, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for your detailed explanation. And my next question is also related. Do you mind sharing how you organized the campaign for the support for Uyghur people's rights, which was, again, also included in the Labour Party's 2019 general election manifesto? This is no doubt, another milestone for a grassroots campaigner. May I ask what has been achieved since?
Okay. Yes. I've mentioned this a few times. As far as I know, it's the first time that the Uyghur people as an issue, as a people confronting oppression, have been mentioned in that there's been any mention actually of the Uyghurs in any. When I say major party, I mean I'm Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrat, Green, and so on. In the UK, I don't know of a precedent, and I imagine that from now on that it's a much bigger issue now. Parliament has taken a vote on the question of genocide, for example, against the Uyghur people. So I imagine it's more likely that this question this issue will feature in such documents in future. It felt like an important step. Having said that, it was, and I'll come back to some of the work that we did around the issue, but it was a fleeting mention. I don't want to overstate the level of the achievement, and in many ways it was a disappointment not to get a clearer statement. So the achievement simply was to get the words out there, to say, well, there's some kind of issue going on here. But what it wasn't was a clear statement of the Chinese state is oppressing the Uyghur people. That's the problem. We need to do something to support the Uyghurs. We didn't get that. We absolutely did not get that. What we got was a kind of acknowledgement that there's some kind of conflict going on between China and the Uyghurs, and suggestion that we need to find some kind of peaceful resolution to this. So it didn't really sort of express the issue in the way that we wanted to see. However, it got the issue out there, and it felt an important step at the time. In a way, more important was the fact that we were able to run a campaign around trying to get the issue into the manifesto. What was one of the things that was healthy at the time, and although I'm reflecting quite critically on some aspects of of the Labour leadership at the time. I generally see myself as someone who saw many things about that leadership as the leadership under Jeremy Corbyn as better than what had gone before, and was very hopeful about the sort of political shift in the Labour Party in terms of an emphasis on more radical socialist policies. And on some other issues of national oppression, they were much stronger than they were on this. But we wanted to. That was one thing we wanted to say is, well, human rights are for everyone. Absolutely for the Palestinians, absolutely for the people of Kashmir, and so on. Also for everyone living under Chinese rule. What we then did as campaigners, we did, I suppose, what most campaigners to do, which was that we used every possible connections we had. We tried to get, we used the networks that we had, and tried to get as much support as possible for. So we had an online petition saying, look, we want this issue in the manifesto. We want Labour to make a commitment, solidarity with the Uyghur people, standing up for their human rights, recognising the atrocities being committed by the Chinese government. We got some of the Labour candidates, some I knew sort of local to where I lived. So, I was able to, it was kind of relatively easy to contact some people. We put out a more general call on social media to see who else would respond. We didn't get a huge number of Labour MPs and candidates supporting it, but it was enough to kind of give it a bit of a profile. And I was able also to contact specific organisations like the Labour Campaign for Human Rights, whose chair, Matthew Turner, signed up to support our call. And I even tracked down, I knew that Owen Jones, the journalist, who's also a prominent left-wing Labour Party activist. I knew that he was leading a mass canvass during the election or sort of early on in the election campaign. So I went there with specific, and he's very difficult to contact otherwise. The main way you can contact Owen is if you have to go to a demonstration or protest or event that he's speaking at, and asked him to, if he put his name to it, which he said, yes, that's absolutely fine. Very, very supportive of this. I'll put my name to this. So there are, when you get, obviously, if you get high-profile people on side, then you can, you get a lot of support. We wanted to make sure we got support from, that it was a real grassroots movement as well, that we got support from people active in their trade unions, in their local Labour parties and so on, that it was something that was coming from the grassroots of the movement. So yeah, it was a combination of all those things, really. One of the things that the Labour Party was doing at the time is that it had an official process. It made a call for people, for Labour Party members, and I think even Labour supporters, to have your chance to influence what goes into the manifesto. There weren't no promises about what would go in the end, but look, we want to hear your ideas. So we thought, okay, great, we'll take you up on that. And so we made a submission, organised a petition, made sure that we sent it to everyone we could who would have some say, including members of the Labour Party National Executive Committee at the time. And yeah, the outcome was what the outcome was. It was a mention. I would have preferred a much better, stronger statement, but it was something. I can't hear you now. I can't hear you. Oh.
I must add here that these sort of grassroots level activism and efforts has really reach the MPs. Because I have an sort of direct experience with my local MP. So, they taking very much interest in the Uyghur cause. So I think thanks to, grassroots level activists like yourself, that really, because after all, uh, politicians, they want to be re-elected and they want to subscribe to the manifesto. So, well done. That's what I want to mention
Thank
here.
you. Actually, just on that, I mean, quite early on in the protests we organised, I did want to get, as I say, because we're a Labour movement based campaign, really, I particularly wanted to get some, tried to get some Labour MPs to support our protests. I wanted to get them to come and speak, but it's very difficult. They're extremely busy, and availability for coming along to protest isn't always something they can do. But although we have had, so for example, Nadia Whitome, who is the Labour MP for Nottingham East, spoke at one of our protests, not in the period we're talking about in the autumn of 2019, but later on. But she did send a message of support earlier on than that. Also, so Yasmin Qureshi, who's another Labour MP who was a co-chair of, I think, there've probably been a couple of all-party parliamentary groups, but I think probably the sort of first version of that, broadly speaking, about human rights in the Uyghur region. She was the co-chair of. She was a co-chair of that parliamentary group, so obviously very involved in the issue. She sent us a message of support. So did Catherine West, who's the MP for Hornsey and Wood Green. So, we were seeking to engage MPs because we want to influence them. We want these are MPs taking the issue up anyway, but also because it helps us to reach more people. MPs tend to have their voices tend to carry further.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And MPs, to be honest with you, through my interaction with MPs from different political parties, they want to be approached, obviously they're very busy with so many causes, local, national and international causes, they'd like to be sort of approached. So when they can, they do contribute. And this is from my direct experience from all political backgrounds. Now, again, this is related to what you have been doing. Now, next question is, these government officials, we have heard in the US, for example, the state secretary of the state in the US now, government officials, parliamentarians, experts, as well as campaigners around the world have been stating that China is committing genocides against the Uyghur people. As you know, the Uyghur Tribunal hearings were held in April, September, and November this year. The final ruling or the judgment is expected on 9th of December. That's on the eve of Human Rights Day. If the forthcoming ruling or the judgment by the independent Uyghur Tribunal, led by Sir Geoffrey Nice, QC, and if it suggests that the Chinese state is committing genocides against the Uyghur people, then what do you think we should do?
Thank you. Yes, look, there's a lot in that, and so I might have quite a few things to say, and in a way, it's quite complex. But to start with, firstly, the work that the Uyghur Tribunal has been doing has been very, very important, and because actually to have the sort of rigor, if you like, the judicial rigor of a kind of very well organised judicial style inquiry, an investigation into the evidence, and there's a large amount of evidence of atrocities, of human rights abuses against the Uyghur people, is really important. And and the Uyghur Tribunal was able to question, to investigate, to interrogate evidence submitted by researchers and academics who've been able to uncover evidence and analyze and present evidence. Some of this evidence is leaked government documents. Some of it is witness testimony. Some of it is to do with the the satellite images of the detention facilities across the Uyghur region, and there's other documentary evidence to do with all sorts of things, to do with family separation, children separation from their family, to do with extensive use of forced labour. So the Uyghur Tribunal has done a very important job, and actually, really, regardless of what the verdict is, or what its judgment, what its findings are, that's a really important job, and that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, I suppose I don't want to. I don't really want to give an answer that says what we do really depends on the findings. It depends on the outcome, because we know that whatever is going on, it's atrocities and human rights abuses on a very large scale. Uyghur people know that they cannot contact their relatives. They know that their last attempts to contact their relatives have generally resulted in their relatives saying, it's too dangerous now. The relative living in China, it's too dangerous now, don't contact me. There's been enough reports coming out about internment on a mass scale and various other abuses that and there's a picture that is very clearly built up of the Uyghur people seeing that, not just experiencing, if you like, the sort of more normal level. I say normal level. I mean, we shouldn't accept these things as normal, but in terms of things that we've seen across the world, I suppose, over decades, national oppression, denial of the rights to even discuss the possibility of self-determination, denying the ability to speak out, to organise independent political parties, to organise demonstrations for political demands, and so on. I mean, those things were clamped down upon in a sort of previous era. What we're now seeing, and even I think it almost feels like it's challenging a taboo even to talk about a Uyghur nation, and actually this is true of other minority nations living under Chinese rule, including the Tibetans. I think the Chinese government makes it very clear that talk of separatism is a heinous crime, and whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of it, the fact of not even being able to speak freely about it, to campaign for it. So, however, we've reached another stage now, and all Uyghur people, have this sort of terrible kind of foreboding, a terrible sense of what's happening to them as a people. That their ability to exist as a nation, as a distinct, something that they've taken for granted, even over years of living under occupation, if you like, living under the rule of a Chinese state that they never really saw as their own state. They took for granted that they could continue to reproduce themselves as a distinct people, as a distinct nation within a bigger, broader China. Now that's being, that's what's being dismantled here, and all Uyghur people, I think, very much feel that very strongly. that they're seeing their culture, their language, their community are constantly under attack, threatened with destruction. Those who are religious seeing their right to any religious freedom being heavily restricted to the point of effectively being banned. Seeing communities and families torn apart, children taken away, young men transported hundreds of miles across China to work in sort of prison factories, enforced work producing items in supply chains for many Western corporations. And forced marriages of young Uyghur women to Han Chinese men. If people choose freely, they can fall in love and marry whoever they want. But there's something else going on there. And so, and it's disturbing. And so that's happening anyway. I don't want to hinge this on what the Uyghur Tribunal will come out with. I think regardless, we have to just keep on campaigning. We have to keep on saying there's something going on here which we're calling genocide because we see it as a drive to piece by piece, bit by bit, by various measures, break the collective sense of purpose and continuity of a nation, of a distinct nation, and through all the methods I've mentioned, and of course that's brutal. I mean, what I've described is not just a kind of series of technical measures. It's enforced by brutal violence at each step of the way, and it's accompanied with this incredibly intrusive level of surveillance on people's lives as well, through even reaching into their private homes, but in every public space. So that's all of that's happening. The Uyghur Tribunal may well come up with an official finding, and if it does, I think that will be taken as an important landmark by Uyghur people in this country and around the world, and I hope by those who are able to find out about it, even living in China. But I think that we need to do the same thing, regardless of, in a sense, we need to do the same thing regardless of what it finds. It might the Uyghur Tribunal might find very explicitly that there's genocide happening. It may make a slightly more qualified judgment. I don't know, but it's done an important job already, I think, and that's the important thing. The other thing to note, by the way, is that this is happening. The reason why the Uyghur Tribunal is happening is because there is no official process to go through. The official courts, for example, the International Criminal Court, cannot pursue a case about China because China is not a signatory to that. It hasn't signed up to that court's jurisdiction. Like most countries who may have good reason to think that human rights cases will be brought against them, including, by the way, the USA as well. Countries who think that the court's going to be used against them a lot haven't signed up to it, which is obviously a big limitation on what the International Criminal Court can do. There are no doubt a lot of complicated issues there to do with the notion that, well, at the same time as this is the great contradiction, really, in if you like, global governance is we believe in universal standards, for example, on human rights. But we also believe in national sovereignty, and trying to square that circle has left a situation where an international criminal court can make judgments, but only for countries that have already agreed that it can. So in the absence of that court process happening in a more official level, there had to be an independent tribunal, which tries to replicate judicial procedure as much as it can. But of course, its findings, if its findings go against China and the Chinese government, then the Chinese government will dismiss it as being biased or whatever. But we need to continue to we need to continue to build protests, build actions, build a movement that can seek to influence from below, and that's really what I want to emphasize. We want to build solidarity in this country, I would say, particularly among the workers' movement, and to try to encourage and support struggles that may break out under Chinese rule, difficult and dangerous though that always is. But at the same time, there are certain things that we can support. Governments, government action that we can support, that we hope would also encourage that would also find ways to perhaps to help indirectly, but help democratic and workers' struggles within China.
I think, David, you really you're spot on this. I totally agree with you. Yeah, we have to wait until the independent tribunal's final judgment. But I'm optimistic that the ruling would be in favor of the Uyghur people, as we see the whole world is seeing it. I want to add that I think it was in October last year, 2020, when during a debate in Westminster Hall, the foreign minister responded that if they are presented with evidence of Chinese state committing genocide, then the government would have to take appropriate actions. So I think let's wait for a few more days, and when the result or the judgment comes out, then I think we all have to push, as you said. We all have to push and now urge the government and other international organizations, to take appropriate actions against the Chinese state. So thank you very much. I'm very much aware of the time. I just want to ask you, is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up today's conversation?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you, Sering, for the opportunity, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you as well. I would just say a couple of things. One is, as I mentioned before, we're trying to build support for solidarity with the Uyghur people among the trade union movement. Often that goes hand in hand with other struggles of peoples living under Chinese rule. For example, what's going on in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, there has been, and it's been the one part of China where there's been a genuinely independent trade union movement, and it's been very active and standing up for the workers it represents, often organising strikes and so on. That's now much more under threat, and to the extent that the Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions has made the decision that it's officially disbanding, because it fears for the implications, really, otherwise, because the clampdown there is so severe now. What nevertheless, solidarity with oppressed peoples across China, with workers' movements across China, is really important. Unions which have supported the work we're doing and other sort of similar campaigns, really, in connection with Hong Kong, and also acknowledging the plight of the Tibetan people. So the Rail, Maritime and Transport, the RMT union, recently took a conference decision in support of the rights of Uyghurs and other oppressed people living in China. That's very significant because the RMT has traditionally been very much under the influence of people involved with the Communist Party of Britain, who are hostile to the kind of work we're trying to do. So that's important. The other unions which have taken a view in support of our campaigning are the PCS, which is the main civil service union, Public and Commercial Services Union, and also the University and Colleges Union. So the main union, especially amongst the teaching staff in universities and colleges. So, we're making progress in winning support in the trade union movement at local and regional level. There's support in many other unions as well, and we're seeking to extend our support base further and build the movement we're trying to build further. The other thing is that we're an active campaign. We organise protests on the streets. We will be protesting outside the Chinese embassy, doing that still on the 5th day of every month. I know there are there's a lot as we speak. Actually, it's Saturday, so depending on when this video is going out, but we have a protest this weekend, of course, 5th of December. There'll be more of them 5th of January, and then 5th of February is going to be a big protest again. And of course, we've got more protests coming up this week in December as well. The other thing that we are emphasising is that this isn't really even particularly this isn't really a battle of some good guys in the West who need to sort out these guys in the East who are doing the wrong thing, because Western capitalism is totally interlocked with what China is doing. China provides a workforce for Western corporations. It's the ultimate sort of outsourced workforce, heavily policed, low cost, no trade union rights, and Western corporations are taking full advantage of that. And many of them are extremely, I would say most of them are extremely reluctant to see to see that situation broken or changed, to see the kind of action taken against China that would challenge that, to be honest, because that's their business model. And so a lot of our protests, we've also organised protests against major corporations who investigations strongly suggest are benefiting and profiting from forced labour, including Uyghur forced labour, in their supply chains. Companies like Zara and Nike, Samsung, and Apple. So we've been protesting outside all those stores, and we'll continue to organise those kind of protests as well, because that's part of the picture here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me, Darren.
Thank you, David. Well, just like you, there are many grassroots campaigners, around the world who are helping with highlighting the appalling abuse of human rights by the Chinese Communist regime, which continues to persecute the Uyghurs people, the Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and you name it, across China and its occupied territories. We at Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities would like to acknowledge and sincerely thank you and others for your continued support. I say this because I myself am a Tibetan who was born in a refugee camp in Nepal. When I was a child, I moved from one refugee camp to another, from one refugee school to another. So I know the value of support. I would like to conclude by saying that, as we face the same ruthless opponent currently, the most ruthless regime in the world is the Chinese regime, the CCP. We, the peoples of Tibet, East Turkestan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Southern Mongolia, will come together and fight against this brutal regime peacefully through coordinated approach globally until we regain our freedom, justice, human rights, and dignity. David, I want to thank you once again for your time and continued support, and for sharing your invaluable experience with me today. So thank you, David.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak as well, Sering. Thank you.
Thank you.